Okay, so today we're going to cover some of the criticisms of utilitarianism. Some because there's quite a few. So this is part one. Remember, utilitarianism makes a central claim. Its central claim is that happiness or pleasure is good. It is the morally right thing. And these set of criticisms that we're going to look at today questions that fundamental belief. And they say, well, is pleasure really good? Is it genuinely the thing that we ought to try and achieve? The first person we're going to look at is Robert Nozick. And Nozick has a criticism which has become known as the experience machine. Now, this is in his book on political philosophy, in which he's actually attacking drug taking. But his example here really applies to any form of hedonism. Now, hedonism is the idea that pleasure is good, that it is the right thing to kind of go after. And of course, utilitarianism is a hedonistic theory. It thinks that pleasure is good. It just thinks that everybody should go after pleasure. But if you remember Mill's argument for utilitarianism, he starts with the idea that we desire pleasure, because pleasure is this internal state that is positive. Now, it's this internal nature of pleasure that Nozick's going to attack. To attack it, he has this thought experiment, the experience machine. Let me walk you through this thought experiment. An experience machine is, in this instance, a large box that I drew. The experience machine allows you to go in and experience a different kind of reality. Really, anything you want to experience. He says, you could be the greatest author ever, or the most celebrated artist or musician, or whatever you want to be, you can experience. And it will appear as if it is real. And so you enter the experience machine, and 10 years passes. After 10 years, you come back out. Now, in this time, in the 10 years, you have no idea that you are in an experience machine. Only when you come out again do you notice reality. And stood there, you are then asked this question by the scientists operating it. Are you going to go back in? Are you? That is the question of the experience machine. Nozick sees pleasure as internal. So it happens in your mind. Now, an interesting kind of consequence of this is that, therefore, the cause of that pleasure doesn't matter. So the cause could be real, like you genuinely could be the greatest musician ever and be celebrated, or you could just believe that you are. The only thing that matters is the pleasure itself. That is essentially the position that hedonism is committed to. Now, the fact that it doesn't matter is the thing that Nozick is criticizing here. So Nozick says, in response to this, no, no, no. We care about the authenticity, whether it's real or not. He thought that most people wouldn't want to go into the experience machine. Um, so let me just put this in as a justification. It says most don't want the experience machine. I think if I put it to you slightly differently, because to be honest, I've taught this over many years, and whilst at the beginning, most people said, no, I don't want to go in, I have noticed a genuine shift towards more and more people saying, oh, I do want to go into the experience machine. That sounds great. I wonder whether you would be happy if it wasn't an experience machine, but instead just madness. If you genuinely were completely mad and you thought you were the greatest musician or the greatest author or whatever, and you were extremely happy. But really, you aren't that. You are sad and alone. You don't experience the sadness, but you do, in reality, have nothing like the thing that you think you do. Would you then go into it? I think that Nozick would say, no, that's not the case. The conclusion then is that pleasure, alone at least, isn't kind of the good, the thing towards which we are aiming, as utilitarians and hedonists generally claim. The other criticism that we're going to examine is slightly more abstract in nature. This is G.E. Moore's Naturalistic Fallacy. Now, instead of looking at hedonism specifically, this is looking at kind of the claim of utilitarianism, which is that happiness is good. In other words, they are defined as the same thing. So whenever you experience happiness, that is morally good. And any moral goodness is happiness. There is no difference between them. Now, to understand what he thinks about this, we need to go through, first of all, the open question argument, which is really an argument about definitions. He thinks that there are two kinds of definitions. There are successful ones and unsuccessful ones. So if we have a definition here, doesn't matter what it is, it can produce two possible results. Closed questions and open questions. So a closed question is, I understand the definition, I therefore don't have any other questions to ask. Questions are closed. It could also be, I understand the definition, but I do genuinely have more questions to ask. If it's this one, then it is a successful definition. If it's this one, then it has failed as a definition. Maybe it would help if I give you an example or two. So an example might be something like this. Say, water in this cup here. Water is H2O. And what I'm saying is that those are the same thing. Now that results in a closed question, because if you understand that water is H2O, then of course you're going to allow that every time you see water existing, you're going to know that that water is H2O. And it can't ever be anything other than that. You can't say, well, is this water H2O or is that water H2O? No, water is H2O. They are the same thing. But if we have a look at another example, that let's say that kind of art, specifically say the Mona Lisa, and you are beginning to get worried that I'm about to draw the Mona Lisa, which I promise you I am not about to do. That would be genuinely way above my abilities. But the Mona Lisa, who I'm going to represent, you guessed it, with a stick figure Mona Lisa. Let's just put the smile in there. The smile's important, right? And a slightly non-mysterious, really quite hard to see smile there, and some brown hair that is identical to the brown background. Oh dear. But we would say that that is beautiful. So beauty is kind of whenever you see a great artwork. Well, say, is that artwork beautiful? We'd probably answer no. No, it isn't. It's awful. But we can ask about it. So the question then is failed. It leaves questions open. So the naturalistic fallacy is basically this. It says that whenever you can ask, whenever you define good, you leave questions open. So it's a failed definition. Define good, you got some open questions. You can still ask, is that always good? And of course, utilitarianism, and this is where we get to the criticism, utilitarianism defines good. It defines it as pleasure or happiness. But we can legitimately ask, unlike with H2O and water, we can ask some open questions about that. We can say, well, is it always good? Like, suppose you're a doctor in a war tent, and you have 5 patients all with different things wrong with them, and then enters a perfectly healthy person. Well, you can ask, what would a utilitarian do? Well, a utilitarian would kill this person and split up their organs amongst the 5 unwell people. That produces more happiness. But you can say, well, is that kind of happiness good? And as soon as you're capable of asking that, then you know that the definition is unsuccessful. This fails. So there are 2 criticisms of utilitarianism.